I was at my Thanksgiving Day table with all these college kids, my kids in college. They came home and they all want to talk about Bitcoin. This is stuff we wanted people to talk about for generations. Bitcoin made it interesting, made it cool, made it easy to understand. Bitcoin is media, Bitcoin is energy, and Bitcoin is economics. It's a P2P information network. We're able to use each other to filter ideas. And you know what AI taught me is that I got news for you. We're not that smart. This whole thing that humans are rational, this is insane. All human decision is made either by fear or desire. American people say, how are we going to build the roads if you don't have taxes? Well, in your country, your best roads were built by the gold standard people who had no taxation, who build things that will last forever. What's your excuse? I'll take any degenerate Bitcoiner who figured this stuff out on their own and were able to make a career at 18 than your Harvard degree any day of the week.
Hi, Nolan. How are you doing? Everything fine on your end?
I love my life, Robin. How about you?
I think nobody ever greeted me like that. I love my life, but you love your life because of Bitcoin.
What are we doing? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. How can you not, as a Bitcoiner, love your life right now? Things are going great. Who can complain? It's not possible, right? We're kicking ass. We're kicking ass and taking names.
What do you mean with we're kicking ass in general, or is there like something specific that makes you bullish?
Well, seeing what's happening in America, watching America readjust itself to Bitcoin so that Bitcoin fits in America is enough to make any American optimistic. It's sort of spreading around the country. It's pushing on borders, right? There's this idea that you look at the chaos in the world and you ask, is Bitcoin conforming or finding a place in the chaos? In many ways, Bitcoin's creating the chaos. And, you know, you're in Europe and you got the European Central Bank, and now you got these trade wars beginning with America. Of course, this is something that could benefit America and Bitcoin. America couldn't do what it's currently doing with Europe and altering these relationships if it wasn't for Bitcoin, if it wasn't for a new financial system emerging. So I think we advanced very quickly with what Michael Saylor's doing, with what Bitcoin Magazine did with getting Trump involved in Bitcoin back in 2024 in the summer, and just watching Bitcoin reshape everything through America right now is, I think, the most. Bitcoin has always been the most interesting story in finance. That finance part is really spilling over into kinetic relationships between nation states, between the configuration of the world. So it's all bullish as far as I'm concerned.
How big is it for you that Trump is? I'm cautious with saying he's a Bitcoiner, but let's say with Trump being in Bitcoin.
How big is it for me personally? It was a lonely place. You know, as you're probably aware, being a Bitcoiner has a certain loneliness factor to it, right? Once you start grokking Bitcoin and understanding Bitcoin, relationships change with it's a sort of before Bitcoin, you know, before Christ type situation. You can measure time in it. I'm still close with my dear friends that I grew up with, but Bitcoin creates a type of estrangement in some ways. Once your worldview is based on Bitcoin, and once you start seeing the world with Bitcoin eyes, there's a kind of loneliness factor. In America, that was also true with being a Trump supporter back in 2015. I'm an original Bitcoin 2015, long Bitcoin, long Trump. And that was a very lonely place for many people in America to be that. To be one of those people was not easy. And for that to change now, and that you don't have to mix your words, you can add Trump to toxic maximalism. Do you know how much fun that is to be able to trigger liberal people in America with both Trump and Bitcoin at the same time? You know how much excitement this is? It's like, it's an injection of toxicity into the toxic Bitcoin maximalists that it's like the mutant super serum or something. It just absolutely turns you into, you know, extra bonus toxic. So that's fun.
You also said something interesting. You said Bitcoin is creating chaos. What do you mean by that?
Well, just look at what Trump can do. Look at Canada, for example. I'm Canadian as well, and in Canada, right? The look at the truckers thing that happened in 2022. When the truckers thing happened, of course, the new prime minister, Mark Carney, was the governor of the Bank of England, was the governor of the Bank of Canada. I used to work. He used to have to report to my committee twice a year to give his economic update. I used to work for the Senate Banking Committee in Canada. And so he would come, and I know him. I've hung out with him many times. I used to write him to invite him to Bitcoin events regularly. He never came. I actually have fun staying toward him one time when he said no to an event because he had a book coming out and I was producing a CoinDesk event in the pandemic, and it just so happened that the CoinDesk event was the same day as his book launch, Values with an S in parentheses, values. You know, he's such a good person. He's so great. And he said, "Oh, I can't make it." And then I said, "Well, HFSB, have fun." You know, and I don't think he understood what I meant, obviously. But then he's the guy in Canada that came ahead and told Bitcoiners and wrote an op-ed in the truckers' protest back in 2022 to follow the money. His actual headline was "Follow the Money, Stop the Protests by Using Martial Law to Go After Political Dissidents," or whatever you want to call it, to go after political people. And now there was a thought at the time. I did the math when this happened against the Bank of Canada, and I said, "Well, what happens? What would happen if Bitcoiners globally got together and shorted the Canadian dollar? What would happen?" And I did the math. I found out Canada had about $50 billion in reserves, exactly what the Bank of England had when George Soros broke their back. And I found out the mechanisms by which George Soros did it. It was a $10 billion short on top of their $50 billion, 50 billion trash token, Canadian trash tokens in reserve. And in the case of Bank of England, it took 500 basis points, so full 5% increase in the interest rate, and all of the reserves were spent. So I said, we could the global Bitcoiners who have figured out all this stuff, shorting, Forex, everything, we could probably muster a $10 billion short and get a run on the Canadian dollar. Now, the problem back then was they would have used their Fed swap line to just re-inject the money. So Bitcoin could have taken a punch, could have delivered a punch to the Bank of Canada and the Canadian dollar. The Bank of Canada and the Canadian dollar would have fallen, but the next day the Federal Reserve would have bailed them out. With what's going on now between Trump and Canada and the United States and the trade war, there ain't no Fed Reserve coming to bail out Canada if Bitcoiners decide to take a knock at a pretending trash token and wipe it off the face of the earth. They don't have any gold. They don't have any of this stuff. Canada has been tricked. I often use you're an Austrian school guy, not just an Austrian, but an Austrian school guy. And we of course understand money in psychological terms, right? It's not about the numbers. There's numbers involved, but math has nothing to do with it. This is not a math game, right? This is a psychological game. And the Canadian psychology has been so mixed with US psychology that it can't tell the difference. But when you actually bring out the money, then there's a difference. Canada can't behave as if its money is a global reserve currency. And just because it had these advantages of swap lines with the Federal Reserve, where they could get free injections of capital, whatever they needed in terms of US dollars to shore up their bank, that's gone. And so if, for example, a bunch of degenerate Bitcoiners want to make money and decide to literally bet against the Bank of Canada, which I think is a good bet, you'll make money and you'll actually, create chaos in Canada. I don't think Canada survives any of this. I think Canada's finished. I think it's over. I think it can't survive. It can't survive for a million reasons, but in the end, it will be Bitcoin that ties the bow for people to understand why Canada can't survive. And so that's chaos. That's pure chaos right there.
And you have in your Twitter banner, I love that, like the Fiat apocalypse. Basically, is that kind of the beginning stages of what we see there?
Yeah, I think so. And that's, apocalypse just means the end of time. And time, of course, is money. We understand that as Bitcoiners. Some people call Bitcoin the time chain. Time 100%, the old colloquialism go. I don't know if such a thing exists in the German language, but I know in English, time is money. We're all convinced time is money. And it seems true and it feels true. And they're both finite resources. We spend them on things and whether they're useful or not. It is the end of one time when it comes to the fiat apocalypse. And I think so. I think that Canada has been kept together using fiat trickery. And again, go back to the psychological engine piece that an economy really is. I use the word psychological engine as a proxy for economy. I think that economics, I think they're the same thing. And the Canadian psychological engine has sputtered along for a long time using types of manipulation that have set it up to fail. More or less, Canada uses a taxation power to shift money from different places in the country. My home state of Quebec is one of the richest states in the world. We've got 600 billion Canadian trash token sovereign wealth fund, and 39 gigawatts of electricity available at our disposal because of our hydroelectric dams. We have a nuclear reactor we run for fun. We don't even have it plugged into the grid. And it's to sell nuclear reactors to other areas. So we create a reactor that Korea bought for many years and now copies and knows how to make themselves. But that was a market of export for Canada. We could export nuclear reactors, and we're very good at building them. But the way Quebec screwed the rest of Canada, and I'm a proud Quebecer. I love my home state, so this is no criticism of my home state and my home province of Quebec. It's more that what happened was we made a deal where our hydroelectricity doesn't actually count in our GDP, and when they make this transfer of money between the country, it's based on GDP numbers. So imagine, we understand energy is the economy. Bitcoiners understand energy is the most important factor in an economy. It's the most important factor in this psychological engine to get an economy to perpetuate forward. If you have a lot of energy, if you're Texas, you can be stupid and make mistakes, and it doesn't really matter because you have enough electricity. If you're in Quebec, you can be a socialist country, and it doesn't really matter because you have so much electricity that you can pay for the excess. A place like Germany that I saw yesterday demolished a 6-year-old coal power plant because Greta wasn't happy about it, is not a good sign for their psychological state. But what kept Canada together was, Alberta didn't get to subtract its oil resources from this equation. So Alberta actually sends that money over to Quebec every year, about 14 billion Canadian trash tokens a year, in order to subsidize Quebec staying in the Federation. So I learned at a time when my state, when I was a young man, tried to separate from Canada, and the vote was so close. It was 50.3 to 49.7 to stay in Canada at the time. And the excuse or the blame that the separatist powers gave, the sovereignist powers of Quebec gave, it was money. Money is what did it. The Bank of Canada is what did it. The bank and the economic threats, the psychological threats to your bank account, to your bottom line. Literally, a man with guns argument was made by Canada by saying, you're not going to be able to use our money. And how are they going to stop that? How are they going to stop Quebecers from using the Canadian dollar those 20, 30 years ago? The answer was you had to use your imagination, but at a certain point, they had to go into people's bank accounts and homes to take out their Canadian dollars, and that was getting sketchy. But it's what worked, that fear-mongering worked. Now, without a Bank of Canada, without that institution, there's nothing that will keep the country together. And so it will break apart.
Is that ultimately where Bitcoin leads every country, decentralizing the power of it and making it shrink?
Well, I think so. The United States would be the exception to the rule because the United States was formed as a decentralized agreement to begin with. The United States Protocol, the real original protocol of the US Constitution, underlined that each of those individual states were sovereign countries to themselves that shared very few competencies. Now, war and the finance of war is what altered our linguistic understanding of America. It actually went down to our operating protocol of English and how we ran that in America. It's a very simple formula, though. If you look at America after the Revolutionary War in 1776 and up to the US Civil War in 1860, the way you would have described America in the English language is you would have said the United States are. You would have said that. You'd have said the United States are. You'd have used a plural to be verb. You would conjugate it plural. After the US Civil War in 1860, you started to say the United States is. From then on, you thought of it as a unified sovereign state, not a state comprised of many individual sovereign states. You would have said these United States are, and then you started to say the United States is after that. So the Civil War had this big linguistic effect, really because it was all an exercise in war finance. Now this goes up right up to the Second World War. Up until the Second World War, you would have easily said the United States are. I'm having internet troubles for some reason here. I hope I'm coming through well. Normally I don't.
Oh, yeah, I hear you good. I hear you good. Yeah, I think it's fun.
So after the Second World War, what you started to hear was the federal government is. You even got away from the idea of plurality in the United States. You just hear the Fed is, the federal government is, the Fed is, the federal government, the U.S., Washington D.C. is. Now, all of that was created. Everything America did to win World War II, they basically never shut off. They kept the aircraft carriers running. They kept the institutions that were built, the Washington D.C. institutions that were built in order to win World War II. What we're really going through here in World War III is a psychological and economic war. I don't think it's very kinetic. It's got some, don't tell that to the Ukrainians and the Russians and other people. Of course, there is moments of kinetic warfare going on. I would say even Tesla dealerships have become a location of kinetic warfare right now in America. So there's definitely some kinetic aspects to World War III, but in general, the right way, or the way I think about it, is as an economic and psychological war. We see it with the USAID persuasion stuff. We see it with the nudging. We see with the psyops. We see with the sophisticated manner in which propaganda is spread around, and money is behind that. If you follow the money, you'll get a better sense of what the fault lines of World War III are. Now, most nations that fall under this, that fall outside of the United States system don't have this fallback of decentralized organization to go into. Now, what I do believe is going to happen is that other states are going to join the United States going forward, and they're going to bring a reinvigoration of sovereign ideas to each individual state. So when I just mentioned that Alberta, there will be a 51st state, and it will be in Canada. Canada is not, you can't add Canada as a 51st state, but you can add pieces of Canada as a 51st state to the United States. So when Alberta, with the fourth largest oil reserves in the world, Alberta being a landlocked state requires a good neighbor. Canada ain't it. Everything I just explained about the federal transfer of money, and they're not building them any pipelines. They're not doing anything for them. Right? They're on their own. Trump is going to build them a pipeline. He's going to build them the Keystone XL pipeline, and that's going to bring about 1 million barrels of oil a day. So Canada right now is being held together. The whole ability to keep Canada together comes down to about 2 million people in the state of Alberta. The state of Alberta, not much bigger than Austria, maybe 5 million people total. Not a huge place. Any referendum that happens there would have to take into account the transfer payments. They want to make more money. They need a port to get their product out to market. You got a ton of Bitcoin mining there happening simply because they can't get their product out, but they do want to get their product out. And they have, like I said, just an unbelievable amount and supply of this stuff to get out of the ground, but nowhere to put it. So eventually what I think you'll see is a state like Alberta can join the American Union, but not as one that's going to join every federal institution in Washington, D.C. It's actually going to bring a counterforce, a decentralizing force, a reinvigoration of decentralization and sovereign state consciousness to the United States Union. And that will allow for more participants to join. You're going to have a great increase in what the United States of America are. I can imagine a place like El Salvador even joining the United States of America in a very loose coalition. So it's a bit of a choke on the bone situation, right? America absorbs new states, and a bit like what happened with China reabsorbing Hong Kong. Be careful what you wish for, because you got a bunch of new people in your country in the case of China, but they're not the same as the ones you've had there already. They're bringing something else, and that will affect the whole. And I could see Alberta, who's got a lot to offer the United States when it comes to negotiating entry as a 51st state. I think they're going to get a sweet deal. And I think that deal, for example, I think it's going to exempt them from IRS oversight. All kinds of weird things are going to happen. And then I know Americans, right? They're going to say, well, I want that too. They're going to be jealous. And it's going to create a whole new consciousness. So I do imagine that when we hear the United States, we went from the United States are, the United States is, the United States are, the Fed is, I think we're going to go full circle, and World War III will be over linguistically, when people start saying the United States are again, and we start having a lot more state level sovereignty, state level consciousness erupt. And because it's more about affiliate groups of like-minded people, Bitcoiners are becoming a nation inside of America. We're becoming a separate people inside of America because we see things this way. You know, we've got cultural hubs all across America now. We've got MicroStrategy opening its own Bitcoin studio and cultural hub in Washington, D.C. We've got PubKey in New York. We've got the Bitcoin Commons. We've got one in San Francisco. This stuff is going to continue to be, I think, a big trendsetter when it comes to public debate, content, the ability to move the needle, move the narrative, coalesce around Bitcoin culture, which will continue to spread outwards. It'll affect the grid. It's going to affect farming. It's going to affect health. It's going to affect every aspect of America.
That's super interesting, the decentralized protocol of America, because I do think having a coalition between countries makes sense. But I also see that actually, it was funny because Elon Musk actually published a funny meme. The European countries love to being governed. So even the governments have a government with the European Union. But then I was wondering, isn't that the same thing in the United States with the federal government, and then there's like a state level?
Well,
Yeah,
only in that. So it used to have a little more federalism. The wars took that away. So I'll explain. There's still the representation by population in the Congress. So you vote for your county, who sends a representative in your behalf to the federal level, who deals with only federal jurisdictions. So I guess another way to think about it is, and I don't know if this is the case in Europe, but we've come to believe federal and state are like senior and junior levels, like a hierarchy. That's not the way it was set up. They're co-equals. They split and divide power. And some are 100% powerful in this field, and others are 100% powerful in this field. The federal government was given very little actually in the toolbox. There's not really a lot there. Most of that was invented in order to win those wars. The powers that Abraham Lincoln took over and assumed in order to win that war actually had a repercussion. The power of the federal government descended greatly after the Civil War. It's hard to even name a president between Lincoln and Teddy Roosevelt when the new practice of the U.S. president became standardized, leading up to World War I and those conflicts. And the idea of the current president, the leader of the free world, this is a fake title from World War II that doesn't have to, there's nothing in the Constitution that says you're the leader of the free world. Like there's nothing like that. So there is sure, it could be a little like Europe, but here's the other counterweights to that, right? So first of all, we've got our Senate, which is the federative body. So the Senate equalizes all federal entities, all states, in that every state gets two. So my home state of Vermont, which doesn't even have 1 million people, we've got 2 senators. California, which has 40 million people, has 2 senators. Now they have way more congressmen than we have. We don't even have enough population for one real congressman. We have to have a congressman because it's in the Constitution, but we have a Congress. We have more senators who are more powerful than congressmen in the United States system. Now, it was even more amazing before the Civil War, because before the Civil War, the Senate was not directly elected. The Senate was appointed by the individual state capitals, the state legislators, the state governments. Just those representatives would vote on who to send as a senator. So that injected a lot more decentralization and a lot more state sovereignty. These were not normal politicians. They didn't have to go out and get a popular mandate. They just had to get the political mandate from their state to represent them. So there's forces that can be reawakened inside of the American system, especially if we liquidate Washington, D.C., which is what Doge is doing. Doge is more or less turning off the World War II war machine in ways that we're only just perceiving now. The propaganda parts, the actual human capital that was there. But that's what's being wound down now. The fake abstraction that was created in Washington, D.C. to win the World War II that stayed operational for 80 years past, and now in its dying days is doing all kinds of flailing to survive. But we're going to shut it down. And it looks like it's in the cards. So Donald Trump looks like he's there to shut down whatever happened in World War II, the engine is getting shut off and something new is going to come.
Yeah, that's also in the small research that I did, because I actually had the question in my mind after that tweet, like, okay, how is actually the United States difference? Like, what are the actual difference? One big one also that you haven't mentioned is that Donald Trump is elected directly, which I think is a very positive thing. In EU, all the commissioners, all the people, they're just indirectly, like you vote for an EU parliament. And then they are going ahead and electing someone, which is for me not an not an election. Like you should have the power to elect that person, and that's Absolutely. A big difference that I really dislike about the EU. Amongst many other things that I dislike about the EU, but it's interesting
in America now. The ooh.
I love that.
The
Yeah, they're doing a lot of stupid things, to be honest. A lot of weird small things also. I don't know if you're aware of that, but with bottles,
I love the bottle cap one. It's the best.
You know about that.
I get them here because we have stupid British. The island that I live on in the winters has a lot of British imports. And I have that ridiculous bottle cap you have when I'm down here. I hate it like there's no tomorrow. I hate it. It cuts my lip. Like I rip it off. You can't rip it off because then you've got a little weapon on that thing that's going to poke your lip all the time. It's the worst.
Yeah, I actually also always cut it open, but it does hurt on the lips too. I have to be honest. But without, if you don't cut it, if you don't rip it off, I cannot drink anyways. Like then I need a glass.
It's your face. Yeah. No. It's a disaster. It's a disaster. Like an actual disaster.
And the thing is, it's for me that is a one small symbol of how bad the bureaucracy got to be in the EU. It is bad, of course, but it's like a small detail. But it's an overall sign how bad, for me personally, the bureaucracy is. And I do hope that overall we just come back to more decentralized lineup of countries, and countries have to more compete to each other of their citizens.
I think that's where it's headed. I think the brain drain in Europe is real. I think that the people moving out of Europe are going to have a big effect on the way it's governed. And I'll even say, look, the going back to America and the chaos, the same as Canada, the way it's affecting Canada and what's going on in Europe is in the same boat, right? Europe isn't going to be able to rely on Fed Reserve swap lines to sustain the euro if anything goes south. Moreover, Europe's now got to pay for all this war stuff, I guess. Like that's a new thing. Like you got to pay for all these weapons. A lot of what you see in Europe, like first of all, Europe, like Canadians, don't have natural immunity to American propaganda and brainwashing. There's an idea of superiority in Europe. I went to a fancy European political science school in France. I saw it firsthand, right? That people sort of, America is like unsophisticated, without understanding that they're being gamed the whole time by a very big country with very sophisticated and very low IQ pleb, 80 IQ people too. America's just a big place. There's all kinds of stuff going on, but there's no natural immunity in the same way that it's easy to like hypnotize doctors and people like that because they believe they're not susceptible to this, whereas hypnotizing sort of a naturally skeptical person. The vaccines were a part of this. Like, I don't know anything about vaccines, but the people who were just like low IQ, I don't trust the government. It's the bell curve IQ thing with the hooded and the guy and then everyone in the middle, right? It's that thing played out. Europe just has so much in that middle that they don't understand that some of this stuff is actually beyond them. But more importantly, a lot of European policy, and this is where I think that the biggest blind spot is, a lot of European politics, to me, just look like a spoiled teenager who never had to make critical decisions in life because their father was cutting the Sunday night roast for them every Sunday night and putting food on the table. And that's what America was able to do. America's incredible success and incredible wealth, especially military stuff. America is not a country like Europe. It's an empire. It's a literal empire. And they have different concerns than a country has. They have empire concerns. And so that's where all this military spending came from. The cost of violence in America, they could bear it. They were able to pay for this stuff. And what that set up was this European Union that was like a spoiled teenager, that didn't have to be serious about anything, that could waste all their time on bottle caps and dumb stuff. And how's Greta feeling? Oh my God, Greta is upset. Blow up a coal mine or a coal power plant. So a lot of what happened in Europe, with no fault of the European people, it was just they had a government who had security guarantees from America. It's the same as having your rent paid in some ways. It's the same as having your life subsidized by your parents as a teenager. You know, that's a big thing I noticed. But for example, like I went to Sciences Po in France for school, and none of these French kids that I went to school with had ever had a job in their life. Like not a job, not a summer job. In America, if you're a boy and you're not working when you're 13 years old over summer holidays, you're in trouble. Like you're in trouble because you can't afford to go with your friends and spend money and do stuff. We all worked at McDonald's and made French fries and worked in restaurants and washed dishes. It doesn't, even if you're rich, your parents make you do that, right? That's like a thing you have to do when you're young. And this was like not understood by kids I went to school with. They'd never even heard of that. They didn't know that Americans had to live that way. Now it's a bit changing. You know, the world has changed. So I don't know if it's as ubiquitous as it was when we were younger, but it's still a thing. And Europe just sort of has lived in this state of, you know, and here's, I guess, another, even I don't know how to explain this, but there was a French sociologist back in the 60s who made a look at our politics. And he said, you know what? It's not a bunch of ideas that people have that create and then one day we're all going to agree on a political system. He said, just look at family units, look at the hereditary family units and how family is constructed, and you'll actually be able to derive political systems out of that. So did you know that the fascist map of the world directly graphs onto the primogeniture map of the world? Do you know what primogeniture is? The firstborn male gets everything. The firstborn male inherits the whole bit, right? So that's actually northern France, Germany, much of Scandinavia, Japan, and South Korea. Now, what this teaches males is that the world's inherently unfair. There's nothing you can do about that. But to be successful, you've got to be amazing. You got to be great at everything. You got to be charismatic. You got to be excellent. And it creates an obsession with fashion as well. By the way, that's a weird thing because you got to be a peacock male. You got to stand out. You got to be attractive at all times, good at all times, excellent at all times, put together at all times. The communist map of the world, right, is really just graphs on the longhouse living where extended families live together. So Spain, Italy, south of France, Russia, China, they're used to parts of the family going off in the corner, deciding stuff on their own. And everyone just kind of assumes that it's for the better of the family. So it's okay to live that way. You've got the Middle East, which is heavily family organized weddings and marriages, so that the religion and the family part is can't be separated from the government. Then this weird abstraction, England and America, where Quebec would be the other example of primogeniture. Quebec, which has got a very top down, it likes things like Germany. They can have a high trust society where they just tell everyone what to do, like in Sweden or something, and everybody just actually does it and it works out, right? Like Japan too. It's like, but that's another one of these primogeniture things, right? It was like how inheritance went. But this weird little quirk of Anglo-Americans where democracy comes from, it's inheritance. They're like, I'm going to give it to all my kids. Whoever's cool, gets whatever. And if you're a jerk, I won't give you anything. But if you're cool like everyone else, you all get the same. And that's like literally the democracies of the world. It's just a couple of weird British inheritance rights that spilled over to America with a sense of fairness. And that's it. That's the whole game. So the effects of these politics mean that there is still going to be a decentralized way of practicing these different systems. Like I don't think Quebec, even if it goes full Bitcoin, even if it goes full energy rich or Japan, they're still going to have a type of top down society. That's what they like. I think a lot of those places in Europe that I just mentioned, northern France, Belgium, Germany, they're still going to want structure. So decentralization will still fit different areas, the way they practice and live their lives and the way they construct their families. And I think that's the way it's going to continue to shake out.
Let's take a break for a moment and appreciate the beauty that Coin Vigilante has made with the Bitcoin watches. Those watches are the most amazing, the most elegant way of showing that you are a true Bitcoiner. And Coin Vigilante just dropped a completely new and amazing Genesis edition of their watch collections. You have the date of the first ever mined Bitcoin block in there, and of course also the block height and which epoch we are currently in. I love the level of detail they put in this masterpiece. Make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. And now if you have Bitcoin, I really do hope that you don't have it on exchange. But if you do have it on exchange, I have two ways for you to deal with that. The first way is you put it on a hardware wallet. That's the entry for you to get into the self-custody game. I recommend BitBox, Bitcoin only edition for that. It's a super simple and secure way. And if you check out the link in the description, you even get 5% off if you use the code Robin. And the second way is the Bitcoin Way. The Bitcoin Way is your all-in partner in terms of how to get the most out of your sovereignty. They will personalize for you a self-custody setup that is perfect for your individual situation. They will show you how you can secure your own devices. Securing your Bitcoin is not enough. You also have to keep all your devices secure. One topic that is overlooked often is the inheritance plan. What happens with your Bitcoin once you are no longer here? Do you have a plan for that in place already? And last but not least, if you're in a jurisdictions where you don't feel safe, it's better to get a plan B. For all that, head over to thebitcoinway.com/Robin to get a 30-minute free call. And just a quick side note, I will be for the first time ever speaking at the Bitcoin Prague event in June. It will be absolutely legendary and I'm really looking forward to seeing all of you there. You can get your ticket in the link down in the description of Bitcoin Prague, and very important, use code Robin to get 10% off your ticket. I'm really looking forward seeing you there. That's super interesting. And for me also, I mean, you have mentioned a lot of interesting things. Maybe let's get into this concept of World War III. And there are not a lot of people that actually talk out loud about that information war that we have. And we definitely have one. It's like very, very obvious, which with social media and the connected world, it makes it even more interesting. And I actually use the term digital soldier a lot, of like, I see myself as a digital soldier of the Bitcoin revolution, because maybe hundreds of years ago, we also have it now. Like there are soldiers, as you said, in the Ukraine that actually fight. But most soldiers right now is narrative. We have communist narrative, we have liberal narratives, we have conservative narratives, we have Bitcoin fiat narratives. We have all the different narratives. And I'm just a soldier for Austrian economics and Bitcoin and those kind of things. But there are a lot of other people on the other side, and we are trying to push a narrative onto the world in that information war. And that's super interesting. I never connected that with this is World War III and we are already in it and we are fighting it. That's an interesting way to look at what would you say? Like usually there is something to be fought over in a war. What are we fighting for in this World War III information narrative war?
I think it's about how information propagates around the world. I think it's Nakamoto consensus versus whatever system Fiat used, which has a lot less fault tolerance. I'll say our fault tolerance literally is 49%, 51% attack. So our fault tolerance is up to 49% of broken nodes in the network. So I often say that Bitcoin isn't just a P2P electronic network. It's a P2P information network. We're able to use each other to filter ideas. And what AI taught me is that remember the beginning debate about AI, and it's like, when is it smarter than us? I got news for you. We're not that smart. This whole thing that humans are rational, this is insane. No one's rational. All human decision is made either by fear or desire. Now, we are able to rationalize those fears and desires after the fact, and we call that intelligence. But watching AI function with prompt engineering, to me, this is exactly how humans work, right? We can all be prompt engineered. There's almost no way around it. We're pattern recognition machines. That's the operating system. And if I start a pattern, if I go 3, 6, 9, you have to finish it in your brain. I've prompt engineered you. There's no way you can't see the next number in the pattern. You're incapable. Unless you're one of these low IQ people that doesn't know how to count, right? Which is, again, what we were saying, that there's an immunity there of being a low IQ psycho. So when you do the 369 and then you see the pattern, your brain will want to fill in the blank. And that's how fiat propagation has worked for so long. It understands patterns, it presents patterns, and it comes in this top-down structure, right? We know that fiat, which basically means government declarations, right? It means to declare, to state. We actually made money that is government declarations, that is literally just things government says is the money. Now, to propagate the network, you required propaganda. That's why propagate and propaganda are the exact same word. You can't get around the world unless, and these ideas can't get around the world unless they are propagated and unless they funnel around the world in this way, right? So what we saw was, that's what those world wars were really about. This First World War and the Second World War, they're really about war finance and how you pay for war and how you figure out how to do it and how you perpetuate these things around the world. America invented the greatest war finance mechanism ever. And your country, I think, shows the battle scars of it, right? When American people say, how are we going to build the roads if you don't have taxes? Well, in your country, your best roads were built by the gold standard people who had no taxation, who build things that will last forever. And if you go back to World War I, you'll find out that Austria and all these places sued for peace again and again and again because they couldn't afford the war. America could afford the war, and we hit it hot. We went crazy and just kept pumping out more stuff. And because we were collateralizing people's birth certificates and dumping debt on their head and paying for weapons that way. This was not possible in a gold-backed nation. And so what we found is, indeed, World War III is about this thing coming home to roost. Entropy set into the system of collateralizing people's birth certificates. That's why we have to have open borders. We need more collateral. Literally, that's just more collateral, right? You need more people to stuff debt on their heads if you want to keep fighting. You give them a social security number, bang, that's another envelope you can open. That's more debt you can put on the heads of Americans, more American heads, more American debt. That's why when they talk about the debt ceiling, it's about raising the amount of money per head. The other way to get more debt in America was increasing the heads. That was the other way. That's why we've had open borders. This was part of that warfare. And so when I think back on just the fault tolerance, right, this propaganda propagating fiat, the fault tolerance is actually quite low, right? If 20% notice, the thing starts to come under real stress and has a lot of problems. That's why I often say that I'll take one Bitcoiner over like 1,000 NPC no coiners any day, because we have the ability in this P2P economic war, in this psychological war, to have way more of an impact. And it is because our fault tolerance in the Bitcoin network allows us to parse through this information to avoid the worst parts of prompt engineering, because we can look at each other and we can say, did you catch that? Did you catch that? And so information spreads much quicker and more accurately amongst Bitcoiners than it does amongst fiat people. Like, is it news to you that Greta is an idiot? No, Bitcoiners know she's an idiot, right? And that's fine. She can be an idiot. I don't really care. I don't get angry about it. It's not something that's in my day-to-day life or anything, but that's what's allowed Bitcoiners to traverse this thing. We are all products of our wants and fears. And Bitcoin helps you understand that a little better, because with the lowered fault tolerance, that we can handle so much bad news, process it, and then look out for each other in a decentralized way actually creates a huge forward momentum for us. And the fault tolerance of the fiat system, even in Europe. I mean, can a European nation survive 30% of its people saying this is all lies and bullshit? It couldn't in the Soviet Union, right? It's the same sort of glasnost type situation where once the whole can't stick, it falls apart. And that's what I think we're seeing in Europe today. I think we're going to start seeing that more. I think the P2P warfare, the hand-to-hand combat, is in effect. That's the problem with the brain drain, though, in Europe. That's the problem with Europeans leaving, is that, and Americans, because of double taxation, we didn't leave. And so we were stuck in our living rooms, stuck in our kitchens, stuck arguing with all of our friends and family. And it did have a bit more of an effect. Whereas in Europe, they just split, right, and go somewhere else.
What do you think is the role of Bitcoin in that information war?
Again, just look at what Bitcoin meetup culture has done, right? Bitcoin meetup culture has taught financial literacy, energy literacy, media literacy, probably better than any other centralized education system in the history of the world. Universities are nowhere near as successful in teaching us about economics than Bitcoin has been. I mean, Austrian economics has been taught. That's what it comes from. Austrian economics is the name of a like a university. Or no, is it? Anyway, it was an idea that mostly was housed in universities for a long time and academic institutions and things like that, right? We know Chicago was a big Austrian school type of University of Chicago was a big Austrian institution, and even institutions would get labeled with these sort of economic ideas that they helped promote and wanted. But none of these guys were successful. I remember Christopher Giancarlo, the former head of the CFTC, a big stablecoin guy now, when he was testifying in the United States in 2018 about Bitcoin and the futures markets, derivatives, what was going on. He actually said that to the Senate. He said, look, I've never seen anything. I was at my Thanksgiving Day table with all these college kids, my kids in college. They came home and they all want to talk about Bitcoin. This is stuff we wanted people to talk about for generations. Bitcoin made it interesting, made it cool, made it easy to understand. If you look at Bitcoin meetups, I know I'm involved in Bitcoin events, right? I produced the Bitcoin conference for Bitcoin Magazine for years. Before that, I produced CoinDesk Consensus in New York. And we really did believe, people would say, how much bigger can these events get? Because we started pretty small. The first one we did in New York was 2015. And so these were, 1,000 people would come and things like that. And people say, and every year it got bigger. How big can they get, right? How big can they get? And I would say, well, universities have left us an entirely free field. They're doing nothing. They can't keep up. They're too slow. You can't get a job in our industry going to university. If someone went to Harvard and then comes to me in Bitcoin and says, I want a job in Bitcoin, I'll laugh in their face. I'll say, what were you doing all these years? Why did you go to Harvard? Like, you wanted to go to Gary Gensler's MIT lecture across the river? Like, what are you even talking about, right? There's no, what's your excuse? I'll take any degenerate Bitcoiner who figured this stuff out on their own and were able to make a career at 18 than your Harvard degree any day of the week. And so we understand that we've promoted and propagated this information much more effectively than any other platform. And so the role of Bitcoin is that P2P nature, the Bitcoin meetup culture, that's been more successful at teaching the most important subjects for 2025 and getting through World War III, which are indeed financial literacy, energy literacy, and economic and media literacy. These three factors, right? Bitcoin is media, Bitcoin is energy, and Bitcoin is economics. And all at once, you're able to become an expert in these three fields, which happen to be the actual battlegrounds of World War III. So Bitcoiners have dominated these battlegrounds. It's not even close. That's why if you go to DC today, right, if you go to Washington, DC as a Bitcoiner today, you'll be seen in the same way as like a crack team that were heroes in World War II were treated as heroes, right? Because the people who work in politics there didn't see it coming. They didn't see this right hook come in from the tech bros and the Bitcoiners and the Silicon Valley thing, which just completely devastated the intellectual claims of the left and was seen as a shot out of nowhere to a lot of these political staffers. And when that injected itself to win this war the way it did after Bitcoin 2024, and seeing all this human capital rush into Bitcoin, rush into politics that weren't the usual suspects, this had a huge effect on just dinner time conversations, living room conversations. It's to the point where it made it cool. So like I said, if you go to DC right now and you're at a political function, they start pointing at Bitcoiners as if we're these mysterious celebrities that literally won important battles in a war for them. Like we're treated as if we're these economic or wartime heroes back from a great victory at D-Day or a great victory at Iwo Jima, some famous thing they read about in the papers. They're like, oh, did you see David Bailey is here? Nick Carter is at the party. Oh my God. Like they mythologize a lot of these people. And so that's a big part of why we won and a big repercussion of what happened.
Yeah, the power shift towards Bitcoiners is, I think, under discussed of uh, what happens in a world where those Bitcoiners who there's like 80 IQs, as we discussed today a lot, have all the capital, the resources, but then also the status, because we have fought and won a war, and we know how and why we won. And this is something really amazing. And I also love how you said it. I think in the beginning of this, I think you call it psychology revolution. I think I always call it like Bitcoin as a social. Yeah, I always call Bitcoin as like a social revolution rather than just a technical one, because if it's just a technical one, someone could copy Bitcoin. And there are a lot of copies from Bitcoin, but it's a social revolution. And I like big fan of Jeff Booth saying we are Bitcoin. Like that's we are the Bitcoin, and this is the social revolution of Bitcoin. And I think that's something that outside of Bitcoin, most Bitcoiners get that, like most Bitcoiners that are informed get the social revolution. But outside of Bitcoin, a lot of people don't see that. They're like, oh, but why wouldn't you make the Bitcoin size a little bit bigger to fit more transaction and improve that one small feature? And they're like, no, it's a social. It's about the social revolution, and not so much about the technical one. Even though the technical one is really genius, and that's a really great point that you made.
That's I guess back to the psychological engine piece, right? Where and this is where even Bitcoin surprised people in America. America was so long dominated from the tech scene with the fail fast and break things psychological mindset. That's why even this stupid Jason Calacanis guy, like a Bitcoin 2.0 upgrade, like, how many times we've been through this? That's what makes Bitcoin stand out against crypto. Crypto is the same as baseball cards, the same as a video game. It's consumer technology, right? It's iPhone 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Give me the next one. What makes Bitcoin interesting is that it's defied the consumer technology psychological frame. It's defied this quality that you've got to be new and exciting. This was fine for video games. It was fine when Zelda came on Nintendo and you could send a patch if something went wrong, if it was just a software glitch. These are toys. Right? Remember there was Bitstein had a really good dunk on someone who thought they were bragging, Ethereum is like a Lego piece and Bitcoin is like a brick. Ha ha ha, you can build with this. And he goes, no, you have it exact, right? Bitcoin, indeed, brick by brick, you can build giant edifices to do anything you need and house human flourishing and activity. Legos are literally a children's toy. And you can build as much children's toys as you want with them. It's true, but they're toys, right? So that's the difference. Now, going back to this psychological thing, and this is where when you asked about the 80 IQ pleb thing, where things are headed and why this is so revolutionary and important, because this gets into the time preference thing. I think a favorite subject of Bitcoiners, especially Austrian school Bitcoiners, right? What I said earlier about, we're just the products of our wants and our fears, and these are subconscious, and we make decisions based on them. What Bitcoin actually helps you do is reprogram those wants and fears. It goes deep into the subconscious. And that's where the time preference stuff ends up actually getting actuated, right? It is not a conscious thing, time preference. It's a training thing. And that's where the Bitcoiners in this new era of winning all this political clout and winning all of this prestige is really going to start highlighting changes, right? Because Bitcoiners have long shared the ideas around diet and exercise and all these low time preference things that are really vital and important. And that's what's going to actually start reshaping how we organize our society. It's the perfect bridge because, the best and brightest always go into whatever job pays the most, right? That's just what happens, right? The job that pays the most, the best and brightest want that job. It doesn't matter what it is. And for so long, we made financial engineer the best job because it was the best paying. So it took the best and brightest in America to go work on Wall Street, to go do all these things, absorbed so much quality human capital that it distorted American human capital in general. Silicon Valley did something very similar, consumer tech, consumer applications. Now that Bitcoiners are doing it, what actually can come as a result of that is whatever you do and then you put it into Bitcoin starts to become the more important thing, right? We can actually bring back farming and cattle ranching as like the best job you can get because it's great at getting Bitcoin, right? We're going to show the world the next part of this story is actually changing the wants and desires and the fears of human beings to get really in deep into the subconscious programming of the human mind. And that's where the software and running the Bitcoin protocol psychologically in your worldview is going to pay huge dividends for both humanity and for individual Bitcoiners, right? We're going to start to be, over at Roxham TV, I know we're trying to build out 24 hours of Bitcoin content. We're a marketplace for commodities and US equities, but everything's measured in Bitcoin, right? So it's a global marketplace, but the only reference is Bitcoin because ultimately, again, we win World War III when oil and energy is priced in Bitcoin. That's game over. When rich people, right, and a lot of people had the idea that it'd be a bunch of plebs holding Bitcoin that was going to change the world. I've long suspected that's not the route we're taking. I've long suspected the route we're taking is to corrupt the richest people in the world so that they define wealth by Bitcoin and to corrupt and infect the energy industry to the point where they only see Bitcoin as the benchmark for their products. Once that happens, it's game. That is hyper Bitcoinization. It's game over, right? It doesn't matter who's holding Bitcoin. Doesn't matter how many plebs, how many people have it. If the two most important pieces of the global economy that help perpetuate this psychological engine, energy and wealthy people, reference Bitcoin and benchmark their stuff to Bitcoin, game over, right? And we're getting there very quick. That's what's happening with the Treasury debate. That's what's happening with the Bitcoin strategic reserve in America. That's what's happening with Roxham and energy. Eventually, America's going to have to make choices about the US dollar with everything that's going on. I doubt BRICS is going to be able to create a reference rate for energy and oil. No one's going to believe China, Russia, Brazil, South Africa. Come on, like get out of here. Get the fuck out of here. I'm not buying oil from these guys. Sorry. And I'm not believing their rate or anything. Right. And I think eventually America is going to have choices to make as well. Right. It's got to serve its people. And the money is about to become food stamps, exactly what they wanted, government policy, right? They want the money to be government policy based, government words based. They're going to get exactly what they wanted. The universe delivers to them what they asked for. Food stamps. It's all going to be food stamps. European Union money. So we're entering bimetallism, right? Which is the period that preceded the US dollar, right? Bimetallism was the economic system of America before the Federal Reserve. Bimetallism, just one money for consuming, one money for saving, one money for your coffee, one money for your Coca-Cola, one money because you worked hard and you want to put it away. It was silver and gold at one time. It's going to be fiat government policy money and Bitcoin. Eventually we'll get to full hyper Bitcoinization, but I see us in this middle ground for a little while. It's going to be how we perpetuate the country, and in Europe as well, and all these places. But eventually, the Bitcoin aesthetic, the Bitcoin subconscious programming towards low time preference is going to be the most desirable thing. And again, we are not rational people. You can't teach health as a intellectual subject. You can make people want that. People can say, I want to look like that. I want to be like that. I want to blah, blah, blah. And that's what Bitcoiners are going to continue to perpetuate. When I said this thing about the political staffers pointing at Bitcoiners and seeing them as celebrities, this has another part to it as it goes forward. And the next part is going to be, wow, he's a farmer? I got a farm in Vermont. The Bitcoiners are turning into farmers left, right, and center. And you can see it with the birth rate amongst Bitcoiners, the accent on family, the accent on parenthood. This is all very new stuff, old stuff, but new. And Bitcoiners, of course, envy these things amongst each other. What are we willing to spend our Bitcoin on? I will spend my Bitcoin on family stuff, on how we live, how we spend our time, on stake, right? I never have a problem giving someone Bitcoin if they're giving me a nice, part of a cow. So I think in Europe, that'll be the same story, right? Bitcoiners in Europe are going to be able to, Europe has so much to brag about. And yet the feeling there is so low right now. Wait until some of these people go and build Bitcoin citadels and abandon Italian mountain towns. And we end up seeing the true capacity and beauty that Europe still has.
It's really a shame because Europe is such a beautiful continent to live in. The old buildings, the landscapes, the beaches, the mountains, the lakes. It's so beautiful. And then at the same time, we have that bureaucracy and that weird political apparatus on top of us. And I would love to live forever in Europe. And the more I travel, the more I see the beauty of Europe, which is really cool. But at the same time, I'm like, okay, there are, especially because I've zero income from Austria, and then I live in Austria, so like there's zero dependency from Austria because I like literally no income at all from Austria. So I could live wherever I want to live. And the question in my head of like, do I move and where do I move? Those questions become bigger and bigger. I'm like, why am I here? And I still have some hope in politics because there are some things shifting. But you're also wondering, okay, how much is it how much is it really changing? And is it quick enough? And would there be a different part of the world that might be better placed? So there's a lot of interesting game theory things currently going on in the world, and it's so interesting to watch.
I'm predicting a happy ending for you guys. I think there'll be Germany might not make it, but the Germans will be fine. The Germans were fine before Bismarck, without a country. People don't realize Germany is a brand new country. It's not like this thing that's been around forever. It's not even close. It's a brand new thing, right? It was literally created just a few years ago. And Germans knew how to organize themselves without nation states for a long time. In fact, it was its wealthiest, most prosperous time. And my family is from Baden-Württemberg, so just on the French border, near Freiburg and Switzerland. And I've been in your country, Innsbruck. I've gone skiing there, and I've been around Salzburg and Vienna. And I look, I lament people leaving Europe. I don't blame them for leaving, but I think the fight is worth keeping up. I keep a place in Quebec, and I'm fighting for Quebec sovereignty now. I do believe Quebec will be sovereign and successful as a sovereign state. Quebec will not be joining the United States. As pro-America as I am, Quebec just doesn't need it. They've got ports. They've got everything they need. They can easily be a country and a nation without much trouble. And it's a coherent place. There's a people that share the land and sort of get it, right? I think it's the tribal people who get the land, people who understand it, are all that's going to be available to people to go forward. There won't be much left to build on top of. And Europe has enough of that. I think there's enough of that in France. There's enough of that in Germany. Certainly enough of that in Austria. I think Austrians have a long history of being, a mountain community, right? A mountain community. And before there were nations, it was a bunch of people who occupied a certain mountain range and did very well from their mountain range. And I imagine the happy ending there will be based on indeed the beauty. I agree. I go to Europe just to enjoy it. You can't get anything done there. I just go to eat and have fun and enjoy how beautiful it is. You want it to be, the last time I lived in Europe was when the market pumped in 2017. My wife and I went out to make a baby. We said, you know what, let's go and hang out in Europe for a few months and get pregnant for the first time. And we lived in Antibes in the south of France, near the Italian border. And again, it was lonesome, like I said at the beginning, because there were no Bitcoiners around with whom I could speak, and there was a ton of Bitcoin news. I could go to Monaco and try and sell people there on Bitcoin at the time, which is what I was doing. just private, what is Bitcoin type of things. And, that was okay. But this idea that the European people they're a little behind on what's going on in America, but I think they can catch up real quick. And once it catches on that, again, it's wants and it's fears and desires, right? Europe doesn't fear enough the problems of not stacking Bitcoin and doesn't want enough the advantages of stacking Bitcoin, but it's coming real quick. There'll be no way around it because the appetite to keep Europe together will be as much pain and poverty as they're willing to stomach. And I don't think there's going to be a lot of appetite for pain and poverty. They've shown a unique appetite so far. They surprise me on how much they can actually absorb in pain and poverty. I wouldn't have even given them this high, but there's probably a little ways to go still. But eventually, when you look at just how ugly, it's the ugliness, right? The ugliness and despair of some of the towns that shouldn't be there.
Do you also think that the EU itself will completely fall apart?
Yeah, when the money's gone. Now that Trump has a new buyer for T-bills and doesn't require currency manipulators anymore, the Triffin dilemma is basically over. And the Triffin dilemma, many people understand, but it's more or less that the security guarantees given to Europe and Japan came with an extra bonus that you could also buy U.S. Treasury, U.S. debt, which is what created this financial engineer archetype in America in the first place as the highest earner. And that's what hollowed out our blue collar manufacturing base over the years. So America is recalibrating this. And with the stablecoin guys, right, we know with Paolo, a guy living not far from you in Austria over in Lugano, Switzerland, these Tether folks have literally created a new apparatus. They own more T-bills than Germany now. They're bigger currency manipulators than Germany. And so you're going to see more and more of the decentralization of the U.S. debt to individuals around the world through things like stable coins. I think stable coins are about to go through the roof, absolutely through the roof in terms of volumes, because this is bimetallism. Bimetallism is stablecoin US fiat plus the Bitcoin. So eventually Europe is going to get a taste of what's coming to Canada. It's going to become a speculative attack target. There aren't enough reserves. There's no one who's going to come save them. There's no one who's coming to help. China, let them print you some money and see how that goes, right? You're not going to like it. It's not going to fit. And so eventually the thing that keeps this together is the fake money. And when the fake money runs out, it's going to become completely altered. I think you're going to get a fiat type coalition of exactly those political lines I just drew for you, right? I think France joins the Latin places. So it leaves its sort of Germanic connection behind for the sake of dominating in fiat terms Italy and Spain, and they create a nice little Southern Union. I think the Northern guys create their own Northern Union and start using currency to their advantage that they can create that will be believable, right? It's about what's believable. And so I do see it dividing right along those lines. There will be new forms of money that come out of this in order to pay for the European UBI. The last thing we want is Bitcoiners too. Like I'm a big UBI guy. I'm actually the Bitcoiner who loves UBI. I really do. And I make the case all the time is that most of these sludge people are fucked. There's no helping them. They're not, some of these people will have such big cognitive dissonance from Bitcoin that the rest of their lives are going to be spent bitter, angry, angry they believed in credentialism so much, angry they believed their university degree was worth something, angry that they believed in all. I saw that the Europeans they're going to go attract American academics. That's their big plan. We're going to get all those smart Americans. They're not the smart ones. Let me tell you, they're our most retarded population. Take them all. You can have every one of them. And so the change is going to come financially in Europe, and it can come real quick, and it will be a return to the more feudal roots of Europe, where you do have this great land, you do have this great fertility, you do have this great capacity to produce things that are worth a lot of money. I mean, I would pay a lot of money for delicious German foods, right? I mean, the kitchen where I come from in that part of Germany on the French border is amazing. It's just amazing food and amazing abundance. And they've got the wines from there and the white wines, and it's near Champagne and all these great places. So Europe has still a ton of stuff to offer and a great human capital that's there. And so I think it can get out of this. I really do.
You give me a lot of hope. I like that.
No,
Thank you
it's
so
gonna be
much.
great. It's gonna be great, man. It's gonna be great. Now it might go a little shittier for a little longer, but the answers are there. And indeed, once Canada's going to set the tone here. I think the first country wiped out by Bitcoin is Canada. And once Bitcoiners understand that they can do this, the only shot they can't take is countries that have Bitcoin on the balance sheet, right? That won't work. They're not going to be able to hit America. It won't make sense. America can buy Bitcoin faster than the Bitcoiners can short the US dollar. And remember, the Bitcoin is being held with the Treasury, right? So even if the Federal Reserve gets into trouble, the Treasury is there, and the Treasury holds the Bitcoin. And so El Salvador, are you going to short El Salvador? How are you going to? It's the U.S. dollar plus the Bitcoin, right? So that's not going to work either. But these guys can go and attack other countries, and they will, because the Canadian dollar is a sitting duck, and ain't nobody going to help it this time. There's no, maybe Europe can try, but that's just going to get the attention of the degenerate Bitcoiners onto Europe. Okay, you want to waste money bailing Canada out? I got bad news for you, European Union. The 80 IQ plebs out there are thirsty and they want to make money, and they're going to fuck you, and they're going to do it again and again and again. They're all in Nigeria and China and America, and they're going to have, it's going to be fun. It's literally going to be fun to wipe out the euro, right? So I can see this stuff perpetuating, and that will be the end of the European Union when they can't, because the bank was first. Remember, it was created around the bank. The point was the bank, and then they grafted on the legislative apparatus on top. The bank was the original piece to the European Union. The plans to go to the euro, the plans to have the free trade zone, the plans to have all this. This is how the European Union grew into what it is today. It started as a banking relationship, a banking agreement. And that's what led to the 2001 transfer from the end of local fiat to the European money. So the fakest money in the world. None of the pictures are real. The whole thing's an abomination, right? Like when you look at a euro, none of those things are real things. None of the windows, none of the doors, none of the arches. They're not even real places. The money, even the pictures on the money are fake. And so this is a likely candidate for a Bitcoin knockout punch by global degenerate Bitcoiners that just want to make a little money. And what are you going to say about it? Nothing can be done. They can scream and cry and kick walls and huff and puff. Not one of their degrees is going to help them. Not one of their insights is going to help them. Doesn't matter how well they dress or the scarves they wear around their neck, how much they make fun of American blue collar 80 IQ plebs and how stupid Americans are. None of that is going to help. There is a train filled with reality coming to dump shit all over Europe, and they're going to have to clean it up, and they're not going to be able to. So the repercussions are it's gone. And when you can't follow the money anymore, when there is no money, there's nothing holding it together. It's like Canada. Canada is held together by the banking relationships between the states. Once those are gone, there's no more sinew. There's no reason to stay together. And Canada was literally created to centralize banking. So Canada was created as a result of the US Civil War. And when the Civil War ended, London, with all of its money, looked at Canada and said, we're not actually going to give you money anymore because the Americans are just going to take whatever we built. We can't fight them again. They're crazy. They invented all these weapons. Like, they kill each other wholesale. America's really good at killing. Like, it's our number one industry. We're amazing at it. Like, there's no better country at killing people ever. There's never been a better country than that. It's an amazing sport in America, right? We're just the best ever at all of it. So London looked in 1860s and said, you're on your own, Canada. America can come take whatever they want. We're not going to defend you. We're not doing round three. They'd already gone twice against America in the Revolutionary War in 1812 and said, you're done. So Canada had just enough money left without any more English help to realize they needed to beat east-west infrastructure. They needed to build east to west to avoid American infrastructure coming up in the middle. There was such a thing as British Columbia and Eastern Canada as British colonies at the time, but there was nothing in the middle. So it was a race to claim the middle, ranch land and all that. They didn't know anything about oil yet, but that was the race. And so Canada was all the money. That's why Canadian federalism is almost an exact copy of American federalism, except for the banking. The banking was centralized from the very beginning. And that is how the country was bound together. It was money flowing to build train lines and to build stuff east-west, which is why not building the pipelines and Trump building the north-south pipeline for Keystone is the end of Canada. It can't survive that. Canada was invented to prevent north-south infrastructure to extract resources from Canada down to America. That's the point. And so they've forgotten it because they're full of fiat. They think they are rich people on Bay Street is the Wall Street of Canada. They don't understand what happened, right? They think their banks are untouchable. They're not untouchable. They're going down. And once you attack the money, there'll be nothing left keeping that place together. Quebec will have to double down on what it is. Quebec's an energy superpower. They've got a shit ton of extra energy. They're going to have to go full Bitcoin, and that'll happen across the land. Canada's rich and competent, and they'll apply those two abilities, just like Europe, rich and competent, right? You have a lot in Europe, nevertheless. Despite the trouble, you know how to build a nuclear reactor, right? You're never going to run out of stuff. You could build nuclear reactors, and if the country's in war footing, just look at what Germany did to build the liquid natural gas stuff. I mean, that was a huge engineering project. When the Russian war started, they got it done like that, right? So there's a capacity to do these things that will never go away, I don't think, and that they can mobilize in a war effort type thing to make up for the lack of the banking and the fancy people with the degrees.
I love that so much. It's really interesting to hear those things. I have one question to ask each and every one of my guests, and the question is, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
Well, I do a lot of, is it besides Bitcoin? I do a lot of sci-fi books. It's kind of related to Bitcoin, but I write Bitcoin sci-fi stuff. So have a look.
Really nice. I like sci-fi. That's basically the most interesting question. Always like how Bitcoin impacts the future, and that's usually sci-fi books.
So I've got one called Satoshi Wedding Murders. That's a pretty good one. I've got one called The Blue Moon Orange Coin. That's a pretty fun one too. So we write a lot of books. I can't. Bitcoin's taken over my life. It's a mind virus. So I don't know if I don't know what I do. I have nothing to talk about outside of Bitcoin. I don't know what else there is there.
This is so interesting because actually, like it's sometimes really funny. Like people that are speaking 1 hour, 1.5 hours so good about Bitcoin, and then I was like, oh, like what's besides Bitcoin? And then they're like 1 minute, like I don't know, like what can you learn from me besides Bitcoin? Is there life outside of Bitcoin?
I don't think there is. I would try to do. I like Korea and Japan a lot. I lived there before Bitcoin, but they became Bitcoin countries. So they're like Bitcoin capitals of the world now as well. So I started going over there a lot, and even that took over. Like my whole association with the places are now just Bitcoin too. So Bitcoin is a operating system for you to look at the world. So I don't run a separate operating system anymore. I've removed nationalism. I've removed all that stuff from my worldview. It just doesn't exist. That's how I can be unsentimental, let's say, about Canada. I think it's all going to work out in the end for them. But, I mean, as a Bitcoiner, it's more like I told you so than it is like, oh, save the country. Oh,
I get that. We have an routine in the podcast where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest is. And with my previous guest, Noah Kaufman, I discussed yesterday a lot around the idea where Bitcoin brings us, and if Bitcoin might even bring a moneyless society, an abundant society where there's not even the concept of money or keeping scores. And he asked logically the question, if Bitcoin and no money didn't exist at all, so like there's no money, there's no Bitcoin, there's nothing, how would your life be different?
I'd be doing exactly this. I'd be writing stories and living in beautiful places, chasing the sun around, and All of my homes are sun optimized, so I only get tremendous amounts of sun. I spend actually most of my time just being a dad. I mean, that's my number one activity. So I think it'd be the same. And I'm glad. So Satoshi Wedding Murders is actually about a world without money. Believe it or not, Bitcoin is in it because the only market left in the world in my story is time for money, where you spend your time. And there's basically no countries anymore. What there are is Bitcoin liquidity, and that means there's a lot of ways to spend your time for Bitcoin in a place or other. And a Satoshi wedding is because there are huge Bitcoin holding families, but the way royalty used to hold laws and kind of confidence for the people, in this future state, royalty holds Bitcoin in confidence for people in the sense that it comes in and out of their accounts in a way. But really, what we have in this story is everyone has an eyeball, like an AI ball, literally an eyeball. And your eyeball sort of spends your life with you, but it's also your Bitcoin wallet. And it scales Bitcoin cognitively, so it doesn't actually transact that much anymore. It sort of keeps off books, ledgers amongst themselves that help it understand who owes what where. And so it never really transacts anymore. Just every region is trying to get you to spend time there to keep a hot time market. But a Satoshi wedding is when there is actual Bitcoin transactions, because now the Bitcoin is all like rhinestones. It's like locked up big time because the AI can't look at the public key lest it derive the private key. So it's got to like leave it in a sort of quantum state. So what happens is a Satoshi wedding is when to consummate a Satoshi wedding, a Satoshi marriage, you have to have a Bitcoin transaction, and you go into private to consummate the marriage by joining the wallets. And this is just a fun murder mystery where the story starts and the bride and groom are dead. And what happened is the eyeballs weren't in the room. Now there's only like 10 murders on Earth a year by this point. And each of them are solved immediately because the eyeballs will just subpoena what everything was seen around, and the detective comes, and it's kind of like, they just catch the guy right away. And so in this story, the Satoshi wedding takes place, the bride and groom are dead, but there's no eyeball witness. There's no AI witness. So it's just a follow the money murder mystery story of like why the person did it. They don't really remember how to solve crimes either. They're like, how do we do this? It has been so long. We've gotten lazy. So indeed, that's the world I predict, but there is no money. There's just a place to spend time. The time is all offset by Bitcoin liquidity, and these huge Bitcoin hubs are where everyone wants to spend their time. Because you do get a bit of Bitcoin for making things, friendly.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nolan, for being such an amazing guest today. Before I let you go, where can people find you, ask you questions, and reach out to you?
You can find me on Twitter, Count BTC. You can see my daily show. I think it's timed the same time as yours. I didn't realize that. I checked your YouTube today, and it says 8 a.m. Eastern time. So I do a daily show also at 8 a.m. Eastern time. So we're on top of each other. Mine's live. It's generally just me. I had my first guest ever after 3 or 4 years yesterday. I had Prince Philip of Serbia on the show yesterday. I had Pete Rizzo on this morning just because I'm testing out guests in the morning from time to time. Other than that, you'll find me on Roxham TV. I am one of the main hosts of everything on Roxham TV. Roxham TV is associated with Roxham, which is the Bitcoin denominated exchange, everything in the world measured by Bitcoin. We have no trash tokens in the platform. It's just Bitcoin versus everything. That way you can measure Apple stock or Tesla stock against Bitcoin, and you can measure oil and whatever else against Bitcoin. It's an everything in the world exchange denominated in Bitcoin. It's a Bitcoin worldview platform. And I'm out there building new shows, which is something we should chat about. We have some distribution thing. That's what I wanted to chat at the end of our podcast. So when we break here, I'll have a quick chat with you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Nolan, for being on. Also, thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening, for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye.